All right, let's go ahead and get started. Can I get a quick thumbs up if everyone can see our opening slide here and hear my voice? All right, thanks, Kelly. So thanks for joining today. My name is Josh Peterson. I'm a developer team lead at Esri. I work in our professional services division, so I spend most of my time working with Esri customers, solving real-world problems from the local city of Boulder here near where I live, all the way up to the United Nations and others. So we'll dive right in here. Um, I wanted to break this live stream down into three parts. Hopefully, if anybody's watching the recording, it'll be a little bit more of a bite-sized chunk that you can kind of zoom around and find what you need. We're going to first go over sort of the ArcGIS platform as a service. So this is where you really just need some geospatial services ready to go to use in your apps. And I wanted to do a quick tour of what we've got available. And then second, the ArcGIS platform, Esri's geospatial platform, is pretty massive. And so I wanted to give a quick context setting for how to use all the various components and how to approach the platform as a developer. And then the last thing was to actually write some code. So I want to talk about when you've got an app of your own already, how you might want to bring the platform into your app, so to speak, as opposed to going and building things directly within the platform itself. So I just wanted to throw this picture up. Ironically, yesterday morning I got a delivery of my new coffee beans in the morning, and this was this tag for recycling the bag was in there, and very apropos for today's presentation or for the hackathon that you all are working on. FSC is right there. So let's go ahead and dive into the location services stuff. So we'll take a look at our developer documentation site here in just a minute, but I wanted to call out two specific sort of components of ArcGIS for developers. At the top is all of the various APIs and SDKs that we provide. These are really the ways that you can get your app into, get the ArcGIS platform into your app, whether you're writing a JavaScript application or Java or .NET or Qt, or basically any working on any platform under the sun. We've probably got a client API or SDK for you. And then at the bottom here in the purple is a whole set of documentation around our REST API. This is kind of what I was talking about before with the location services. This is the GIS data and geospatial data as a service. And that's where I want to look first. That's where I want to focus because the client APIs and SDKs are really just wrappers around this REST API, plus some tools for visualization and rendering graphics on various devices and things like that. So the first thing is that we call out here are location-based services. So this is what I would consider location intelligence or geospatial as a service. These are REST API endpoints that you can hit and get back some sort of intelligence, some sort of location intelligence, whether that's something like geocoding, which is maybe a tool that you would use to understand more about a user's location or find a user's location, or even data as a service. And we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a second. The second is services. So this is, you can kind of think of the services that we offer, the feature services, map services, image services, as a place to put your own data or consume someone else's data that they've published. So you can kind of think of this as a database as a service, but it's geospatially enabled and intelligent. And then finally, there's a whole aspect of our platform that's all about users, groups, and items. It's really the content management system or the CMS of ArcGIS, and it's all spatially aware. So you can have your users, they can be in groups, you can manage authentication and authorization and identity through the ArcGIS platform, and it's all kind of aware of the rest of the spatially enabled platform behind it. So I wanted to just hop over to our developers site here. There we go. So this is just developers.arcgis.com. I wanted to first go, well, I'm signed in here. Let me sign out really quickly so I can show you the sign in page. Or I'm sorry, the sign up page. So just the main banner here will give you a sign up. There will be a button to sign up. It's just developers.arcgis.com/sign up, which is nice. And you can sign up for a free ArcGIS developer subscription. And everything I'm going to do today is using a free developer subscription that I've created for myself, and it's not necessarily going to cost anything. So let me go ahead and sign back in. Working at Esri, we have many different accounts for many different organizations. It's always fun. So go back to the home page. I wanted to start here. I didn't have a lot of canned sort of tabs open because I wanted to navigate the site with you so that you can kind of see how to navigate our developers documentation. So the first thing I'm going to go to is the features tab up here. And I wanted to start with geocoding because I know that's kind of the most useful thing for you in this challenge for the Good Code Hackathon. And I wanted to scroll down a bit and just look at some of these demos that we've got in here. So the most basic aspect of geocoding is typing in an address or a place and hitting search, right? And it's going to find it. So 380 New York Street is Esri's headquarters. Looks like Twitch is fighting the rest of my computer for resources right now. So bear with me as things maybe load in a little bit fast or slow. So typing in any address here will give us the place on the Earth, right? And we can see, we could go look at the REST API requests that are being sent out from the app, and we could see how that works. In addition to locations, to addresses, you can search for places. So if I was, in New York and I wanted to find a nearby coffee shop, we can just type coffee shops, and the Esri World Geocoder, which is the service that we're using in this case, or the ArcGIS World Geocoder, is intelligent enough to kind of know what a coffee shop is and attribute that to specific places on the Earth and go out and get us those locations that are nearby. We can do more robust things like searching for intersections, finding a nearest address if we're looking for maybe the nearest Starbucks, and or looking for all the Starbucks near us, we can find the nearest one. And then batch geocoding is very powerful if you're doing any kind of data processing or data analysis, and you've got maybe a spreadsheet of 1,000 addresses, and you need to be able to turn those addresses into points on a map. You could use our batch geocoding services to send all 1,000 of those records simultaneously and get them all geocoded, and then get that data back in a sort of geospatially aware manner. The next feature I wanted to go through, and there's a lot here that I won't be able to get to, but I wanted to highlight some of the more interesting things, is the demographic services that we have available. So as this page loads in here for us, Esri has a whole slew of demographic data available as services. And so what you're seeing here is that we've drawn a buffer, dropped a point on a map and drawn a 1 mile buffer in the middle of Los Angeles. And using our Geo Enrichment service, which is providing the demographic data, we can actually see a lot of information, demographics information about this area that's shaded in blue on the map. And we could obviously be more intelligent than just dropping a point and drawing a buffer. Maybe we could use a county or a zip code or a census parcel as the input, and get back maybe more useful information if we're tying it to districts and boundaries and things like that. Some pretty cool and interesting data kind of demonstrated here as well. Esri has this concept of Tapestry segments coming from the Living Atlas, which we're going to look at a little bit later. This is helping to identify sort of the various aspects of a geography. In this case, I think these are counties. It's too big; those are too small to be counties. Maybe zip codes. And so what we see here is actually, if I close this really quickly, go back. Sorry, everything is loading really, really slowly here with Twitch going on in the background. I won't go all the way back out to the beginning, but we've basically identified different segments of these tapestry segments. And the idea is that we identify sort of the types of people that tend to live in an area based on metrics, coming from the census and other sort of demographic sources of information. things like the total population of the area, the median age, diversity index, household incomes, things like that, and really start to understand the different segments of populations. I'm going to move on. There's lots more on this page if you're interested in demographic data that you can kind of go play around with. Um, like I mentioned earlier, it's actually really interesting to enrich your own data, as we call it, which is why it's called the Geo Enrichment Api, right? So you can upload your own polygons. Maybe they're districts specific to your organization or kind of what you've got going on. Here's income based on LA school districts, right? So that's something that might be interesting to the city of LA or folks who are sending their kids to school in LA. Any polygons can be fed into the Geo Enrichment service, and you can get back the demographic information for that area. And then maps and layers is where I wanted to kind of end with this set of features of the REST API. So when you think of data as a service, you may not always think of base maps as data. Base map means sort of the canvas on which you put your data, right? So if you're going to draw school districts or counties or forests or points of interest, you need to put them on top of a map. And so typically when we're using maps online, we're either using them for routing, and so maybe a navigation base map like this probably looks pretty familiar from other mapping providers as well, is useful if you're just doing wayfinding. Imagery is probably the other most used base map, right? This is just really good satellite imagery, very high quality satellite imagery that Esri provides as a service. But there are other base maps as well. Here's a topographic base map that actually has contributions from organizations around the world. So county GIS teams or city GIS teams or states or schools, higher education schools with campuses, lots of different organizations around the world actually contribute to this topographic base map. And so the data is very high quality because it's coming from many different sources. And then sometimes maybe the dark gray canvas or the light gray canvas or some of these other very muted base maps are ideal because the idea is not to show places or topography or imagery. The idea is to show your data that you're overlaying, right? And so I really like the gray canvases because when you're building a map to show your own data, you kind of let the background be the background and really highlight your own data. Scrolling down a little bit, I wanted to highlight ArcGIS is very into the idea of open data. We've got entire products and teams built around this idea of open data. Going back to the kind of example I just mentioned about city governments or county governments providing their data as services for the rest of the world to use. ArcGIS Online is really sort of the hub for geospatial information or kind of a clearinghouse of geospatial information that's sourced from around the world. I wanted to call out a couple examples here. We've got a product called Arcgis Hub, which is built around this idea of citizen science or crowdsourcing kind of the data, GIS data around the world and bringing it into a single system so that it can all be used together. So COVID-19 is a really good example of this. As I very slowly scroll through here, you'll see that city and county and state and other types of governments and organizations have used ArcGIS Hub at like an amazing rate over the last few months to stand up coronavirus response efforts. So providing data, providing information, testing locations, dashboards. You've probably seen some ArcGIS dashboards talking about coronavirus, maybe without knowing that they were built by Esri or that the software came from Esri. But a lot of that, this product in particular has really shown during this crisis. One of my favorite ones is made by the Nature Conservancy. So they use our hub product. It's just hosted at geospatial.tnc.org. The Nature Conservancy is one of the largest conservation organizations in the world, and we do a lot of work with them at Esri. And they've used Hub to create their own conservation atlas to provide information to the public, everything from their publications to the raw data that they use and collect themselves to do conservation around the world. So this is maybe one of my favorites. So coming back to the developer site, I'm going to scroll right back up here, and I want to look at the living atlas of the world. This is an effort by Esri, led by Esri, I would say, but contributed to by a number of organizations around the world to provide authoritative geospatial information about the world. If we just go to the Browse tab up here, we're right now on livingatlas.arcgis.com. You can see you can get an idea for the breadth of information that's available here. We're just looking at the All tab here. If I go to Environment, for example, you can see that you can actually come to ArcGIS for recent weather radar, right? If you want to display weather radar on your app, or weather watches and warnings in the United States. If you can see the map here that's showing counties and active weather watches and warnings for those counties. Over here, we can see some active hurricanes, additional weather stuff. Some of it coming from Esri, some of it coming from other sources of information like NOAA, right? The weather information is coming directly from NOAA, fed through our platform. I'm not going to go through all of these, but getting back to people, right? There's a lot of demographics data available here right now, very relevant to some of the COVID-related demographics data. Sometimes all you need is boundaries, right? If I can find it in here, yeah. So here's an example of just USA states. They come with some census information, some demographic information attributed to each state, but sometimes you just need to be able to draw states on the map so that you can aggregate your own data based on states or counties or other standard geographies like this. And then so on and so forth. Imagery is a bit of a special case. It's less data, more visualization, although there is a lot of data to be gained from imagery in a sort of different way. But lots of really interesting information there as well. So I wanted to go to ArcGIS Online itself now, which is just at arcgis.com. I'm going to go to again, ArcGIS Online has a concept of organizations. And so when you sign up for a developer account, you actually get your own little mini organization with just the one user, but you get to play around with some of the concepts. And so this is my organization within ArcGIS Online. They're all just subdomains of maps.arcgis.com. I just named mine with my name. But from here, you get access to lots of out-of-the-box tools. And then you can search for lots of data here as well. So I did cheat a little bit. I was playing around with doing some of these searches before the live stream here yesterday. But if I turn off the filter to just look at my own data, and I just search for FSC, so we're not in the living atlas anymore. We're not looking at data that Esri has sort of put out there as authoritative data. We're just searching all of the content in ArcGIS Online. And you can see that we're just finding things from sort of random users here and there. So I searched for FSC. I want to search maybe filter my search down to look for feature layers, which are essentially data sets, geospatial data sets, right? And then maybe I'll look for things that have been modified in the last 7 days, because there's a lot of stuff on ArcGIS Online, and sometimes you need to apply a few filters to really get to the good stuff. And I found this interesting FSC dashboard data set, a feature layer, as I was looking through. And then I realized that it's actually powering a set of FSC dashboards. And I did copy this link because I didn't remember exactly. But over on the fsc.org website, on their newsfeed, their sort of blog, there's an article from January of this year talking about FSC forests, certified forests on the map. And they've built essentially 4 dashboards talking about their actual forests, some facts and figures that are kind of like data aggregated up to the national level for various countries, some information about their members, and then just a simple locator so that you can find the nearest FSC office. Definitely recommend go check this out on their website in their newsfeed. You can find it, showing FSC certified forests on the map. Maybe we can actually just drop the link in the chat in case anybody wants to go check that out. I wanted to open the first one here though, just to give you kind of a taste. So I know because I work here at Esri that this loading indicator is very familiar to me. This is a product called Web App Builder, which we're not going to look at today, but Amit actually talked about it during the first Esri live stream as a part of this hackathon. We can share the link to his video on YouTube, the recording of his video on YouTube. Definitely worth going to check out. He talks quite a bit about Web App Builder and how you can get up and started with that. So if I just zoom in here a bit, again, I kind of cheated and I know where this data exists. So there's a lot of data. There's a lot of forests, FSC certified forests in Canada. There are a lot in Russia, New Zealand, other parts of Eastern Europe. So as I start zooming in here, you can see that we're finding the forests on the map, and we can click and get some information. This pop-up has been configured by whoever created this dashboard at FSC. We got some widgets down here. We can see that 98.83% of those forests are natural, and then the remainder, 1.16%, are plantation forests. We can see that 89% of them are boreal forests, and then the remaining 10% are temperate forests. We can kind of dive in and get more information about the forests themselves. So if we go back to ArcGIS Online and click into this layer, it's named dashboard because I think it was built for the purposes of that dashboard, but I actually want to dive in a little bit and see the data underneath, sort of underneath the layer, so to speak. So we can go here to the layer description and see some information about what it is, right? So this is FSC forests data set, displays the boundaries of some certified forests. That's kind of what I assumed, but it's good to see that in the description so that we can verify that. This is the item details page for this feature layer item in ArcGIS Online. And from here, I got a couple other options. And note that I don't own this, right? I'm just looking at somebody else's data still as a viewer. So the data tab is going to show us the underlying data. Again, if you're not sort of geospatially inclined or GIS is kind of a new area for you, a layer is just a table with a special column called shape that tells us where that thing is in the world, right? There's a little bit more to it than that, but conceptually, that's really all it is. You can just think of it as a table in a database. It's got fields, right? The fields have types, just like any other database system that you might use. From here, I can start to see some of the attributes that belong to these features. Again, these are just rows in a table that happen to have a special column that tells us where they are in the world. But otherwise, we just have attribute data like we would in any other database system. I can click here, show hide columns. I could also go to the Fields tab for this, but I can start to see all of the data that's available, for each one of these records. If we go to the Visualization tab over here, this is where we can start to see how the data is visualized on the map. So this time I'll zoom here to Eastern Europe, look at Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. By default, Arcgis Online is going to throw the topographic base map in there for us. That's not super useful with this green polygon symbol that we're rendering the forests with. So I'm going to just turn it over to that dark gray canvas I was talking about earlier. Now we can really see our data popping a little bit more. So in addition to looking at the data in that tabular view, we can also look at it geospatially on a map here. And when you click on one of the forests, we can see all of the attributes, all of the columns of data that are associated with that row, with that record. We can get more into this a little bit later, but we can also change the symbols. We can display the pop-ups in a custom way, so we can decide which attributes we actually want to show when somebody clicks on the map. We can filter the data set, which we're going to do in a bit. But I think we'll leave that there for now and get back to the slides and start talking about some concepts around ArcGIS. So jumping into the sort of second of the three sections here, we just spent some time going through what location services are available and just barely scratching the surface. There's so much more. We could spend the entire hour or day talking about all the location services that you can get with ArcGIS. But I want to cap it there and move on to sort of building up the context of how you would work with ArcGIS from a developer's perspective. And then after this, we'll get into actually writing some code. So I like to think my mental model for approaching the ArcGIS platform as a developer is that it's a pyramid. And we call our platform is a form of web GIS, right? Geospatial information systems. And so for sort of a generic developer outside of the geospatial world, not really not really in like the GIS space, right? This is the way I would translate the platform at a high level. At the bottom, we've got our REST API. We're going to look at that in a minute. That's just the web services that we use to invoke operations, to do identity management, to fetch data, render tiles, things like that. Sitting on top of the REST API is layers. That's what we were just now looking at. Again, a layer is synonymous with a table in a database. That's where our data lives. And then a layer above that, layer, no pun intended, is maps. And these are just containers for our data. We haven't looked at a map yet in this context. We've just looked at layers sort of in other contexts. But we're going to look at what a map is in the ArcGIS system here in just a moment. And then at the very top are apps, right? These are the workflows and the UIs and the user experiences that we build as developers to allow our end users to consume these other three tiers of the pyramid. And so to kind of translate this a little bit into ArcGIS speak and maybe give some context to some of the words I'll be using or have used or you'll see on the screen. Again, the REST API is a set of web services that you can use directly over HTTP, right? So you could fire up Postman on your machine and hit the REST API directly and get back information, or send curl requests, or send HTTP requests from your .NET application or your iOS application. But we've also got this whole tier of APIs and SDKs for most platforms in the world that you can use to sort of wrap the REST API for you and get more sort of primitive access into the ArcGIS system for whatever platform you're using. And we're going to see how that works sort of in the next section as well. Layers, we kind of briefly previewed this. Feature layers are probably the most common. This is sort of just providing the data access to the geometry, the space, sort of the spatial aspect of the data, as well as the attributes of the data in a sort of raw way. But of course, you can add symbols and pop-up definitions and things like that on top of it. The base map layers that we're looking at, like the gray base map, that's different than a feature layer because you can't click on it and get information about the place that you're clicking on. It's really just an image, and it's an image because it's really there as the canvas that you're drawing your data on top of, right? Into the sort of the maps tier here, we're going to look at these right after this slide. Web maps and web scenes are really the two concepts for these containers. The only difference there is that a web map is 2D and a web scene is a 3D representation, where you can put your data into a 3D map. And then at the top, this is where it's a bit Wild West sometimes because we've got an amazing amount of template applications that you can spin up, application builders. We're going to look at Experience Builder here in a minute. Amit talked about Web App Builder. We have a solution called App Studio to build cross-platform applications with Qt. There's a lot that you can do there to sort of, this is the middle ground of taking advantage of out-of-the-box widgets that Esri's already built for you. And then you can build your own widgets to extend those solutions as well and to kind of piece together your apps or dashboards or whatever you may be building. And then we get into the custom space, which is where I'm really excited about it because I'm a developer. This is just building apps from the ground up. Maybe integrating maps from ArcGIS into an application that you've already built in iOS or React or something like that. So I wanted to use this dashboard as an example. This is a configuration of a product that Esri builds called Arcgis Dashboards. This is built by an organization in France called Terranis as part of their Green City Lab project. And I wanted to build up this is the way I go about thinking about how to apply that pyramid to an application itself, right? So starting at the top of the pyramid, we've got the apps. This is the ArcGIS Dashboard app. It's what decides, where these widgets live, which widgets are included, what colors are used, things like that, including the pop-up, right, where the pop-up goes maybe. The map is what describes sort of the contents of the layers and the attributes and the things that are inside of the map, right? So in this case, the map is defining which attributes we're seeing in that pop-up in the top left, and which layers we're seeing on the map itself. And it's not super obvious, but we're looking at two different layers on the map. There's a layer that's purely used to label the districts. And then there's a layer that's obviously the hex bin aggregations, in this case showing um, tree cover in this city. Within the map, we've got our layers, which I just talked about, right? So this is where we can decide what data is actually exposed by the layers, how they're rendered, the fact that it's using this green color ramp as opposed to a red or purple or blue color ramp, that lives within the map. And then if we want to see the REST API, we kind of need to open our dev tools and look at the network requests that are going out to ArcGIS Online. And we're going to look at this live now. But hopefully this helps to kind of understand the layers. And the reason this is important is because creating each layer in this pyramid can be a separate exercise and can be distributed amongst a team, right? So when I'm working on projects in Esri Professional Services, I'm typically just responsible for the apps piece, the very tip of it, the very tip of the pyramid where we're deciding how to use the data and maybe add additional features to an application. But our GIS analysts and other folks are probably the ones responsible for discovering the data, making layers out of that data, cleaning up the data in a nice way, and then creating maps to put that data into, one or more maps per application, right? And so this is really useful when you start to think about the different roles somebody might play when it comes to implementing something like this. So I wanted to go to that dashboard live really quickly. So this is the Terranesis Green City Lab website. They've got lots of really cool stuff here. I wanted to start at the sort of homepage so I could show you a lot of the cool things they've got going on. They do some amazing sort of GIS work, mostly focused on green space. If we click on the dashboard twice, I guess, this is going to open up what should look familiar. It's the dashboard that we were just now looking at. Some screenshots of, let that load. Nope, that's not it. Sorry, one sec. See if I just clicked on the wrong link. Or if they changed the link on me right before my demo. Let's see, I think I've got it open somewhere else here. For anybody in the chat, feel free to throw some questions in there if you have any questions about things I've gone over or haven't gone over, or maybe you've watched Amit's live stream earlier and had some questions following up on that. You know, I think they swapped the link out on me right like between yesterday and today. So I won't go through that one, but we could, if we have some time at the end, we could go look. I was just going to open that dashboard. I guess we could actually just use this. This is not a dashboard, but this is a story map, which is another sort of part of the ArcGIS platform that you can use to build applications. Let's see if I can get my dev tools open here. We'll close this. And let's just open up another tab here and see if a map pops in here for us. See if we get lucky. It's the dashboard I was looking for. That's awesome. So they just reconfigured things a bit. So this is the dashboard we were just now looking at. And as it loads in here, again, a little bit slow because we're streaming, but we're basically looking at green space in the city of Toulouse, France. And so there's some nice a sidebar over here with some information, if you speak French, about this application and the kind of the goals of it. As we click on the map, we can see the pop-up showing up here with some information about this particular hex bin, which is a sort of aggregation of data. And then on the right-hand side over here, these are some features of ArcGIS Dashboards that I was talking about before, where we can see some sort of data-derived indicators about Toulouse. In this case, vegetation on the surface, tree cover, grass cover, things like that. Access to green space by the public, which is the only red one on here. What I wanted to do is filter what we're looking at on the right-hand side over here. This is going to get a little tight, but let me zoom in and make this bigger. We're going to look at the HTTP requests going to arcgis.com. The first thing I want to look at is going out to this items endpoint. So we talked about arcgis.com or the REST API as these data as a service, location services. We talked about map services and feature services, which is where you can put your own data, which is what's happening here, and then request that data back into applications. And then we talked about the sort of content management aspect of everything. So at the items endpoint of our REST API, let's go and see what's being asked for. So everything in ArcGIS Online, every item in ArcGIS Online is identified by a GUID, a globally unique ID. They're these big kind of gnarly things that you're never going to memorize, but they're used a lot in URLs and most pages where you're going to use any of these things. You can find the GUID so you can copy and paste it into your application. So in this case, we're just asking for that, that ID. This happens to be the dashboard application itself, right? So ArcGIS Dashboards is an app in and of itself, but then you can configure a bunch of different instances of it. And the instances of ArcGIS Dashboard are represented as JSON, just like most things in the ArcGIS API. In fact, this is the same URL as the previous one. It's just /data. That's where we go to get that dashboard's definition. And so we can see that this dashboard includes 8 widgets. We can see what's configured as the left panel. This is a whole bunch of HTML that defines what's populating this left panel over here. We can see the layout that's been chosen by the person who configured this dashboard. There are like myriad options and possibilities for configuring these dashboards. We can see what's in the header panel. Right, I'm just showing this to kind of illustrate the fact that all of these things are really described by JSON. And the application that, in this case, Esri built, or in your case, that you would build, that application gets all of that JSON and information and just uses that to do whatever sort of, build whatever workflows and user experience you need for your particular end users. Going back to the concept of our pyramid, right? This JSON right here that we're looking at represents the app. This is the app, the dashboard app that we're looking at. The next one that we grab, if I scroll down and if I can just call your attention to the type of item we're requesting here, the next one is a web map. Let me go one more in here for you. Type web map, right? So then the subsequent request is going to go and get the data for that web map. And this is the web map that the dashboard is displaying for us. In this case, we've got a base map. We can see that it's an imagery base map. And then we've got 2 operational layers. Operational layers are just layers of data that you put on top of a base map. And if we just kind of look at the titles here, I can tell you that the bottom one is just what's being used to render the labels of the quarters or the sort of districts of Toulouse. And the top one is the actual hex bin data that describes sort of all of these other metrics that the dashboard is using as well. So that's our app and that's our web map. And now these are our layers. And when we get into the data of our layers, I want to apply a different filter here. The way you do that is you query the layers, right? So we know which layers we want to use, and now we can send queries to those layers. And so here are some examples of queries. Let's find one. It's not just asking for aggregate stuff. And here we can start to see the actual values that are being asked for to render the data in the application. And we could absolutely ask for values and then do additional calculations on them in the JavaScript API, which is what the ArcGIS dashboard is built on top of. But in this case, let's go look at the request itself at the bottom here. We can see the parameters that we're sending to the REST API, right? So we're asking that it be formatted in JSON. This where 1 equals 1, so you can apply SQL queries essentially to the layers to get back specific information. In this case, 1 equals 1 is just a shorthand way of saying give me everything. You can tell it whether or not you want geometry. I can tell you that, especially for complex polygons, maybe like a county or a state that has some very jagged edges and lots of different segments, geometry can be a very heavy piece of data. And so if you don't need it, there's a way to just say, don't give it to me, right? Just give me the attributes, and that's all I need. And your request or your response is going to be a lot smaller. We can ask for specific attributes. Again, a lot of times this is smart if you maybe you have a data set that has 100 attributes on it. If you ask for 100 features with 100 attributes each, that's going to be a much heavier payload coming back to your application than if you narrow it down and just ask for the attributes you need. In this case, it's the star indicates that we're asking for all attributes. This is getting a little bit more in the weeds than I wanted to, but this out statistics parameter is actually very interesting. This is not a request for raw data. This is actually a request that's being made for based on a specific field to get the average of all of the data in that field across the entire layer. So ArcGIS Online is actually doing some statistical calculations for us on the server side and just returning to us that average number. And so in the preview tab over here, this value here is not a value of a specific attribute of a specific feature. It's actually an average of all of, that's described by that input parameter. So hopefully the idea here is just to give you an idea to like kind of translate that pyramid into actual HTTP requests that are being made by this application and every application that is built by Esri that uses the the ArcGIS Online ecosystem. It's all based on this REST API. So while you never see it, and it's a little bit hard to kind of conceptualize, it's in the background as the base of the pyramid, no matter what you're building. So I wanted to next go and do that for ourselves quickly. And we've got about 16 minutes left, so I might go through this a little bit quickly and show an app that I've already created as opposed to building the whole thing from scratch. But if we go back here to ArcGIS Online, we found this layer before. We're going to come back to the layer we had found before. I'm going to go back to the overview here. I'm going to actually add this layer to a new map. I can do that here right from the item details page by opening the layer in a map. So this is the map viewer that just comes built into ArcGIS Online in addition to a lot of other tools. I'm just going to call this out really quickly. This is not even close to all of the products and offerings that we've got, but these are kind of the ones that have been configured to show up in my dashboard here. You can my dashboard in my sort of ArcGIS Online app switcher or app picker here. You can see ArcGIS Dashboards, which is the thing we were just looking at. App Studio I mentioned earlier, right? We've got the whole developers site. There's a whole developers dashboard specifically for people creating content at that level. Experience Builder we're going to look at, the Living Atlas of the World, other apps like Survey123 and Quick Capture, which are mobile applications built for capturing data in the field. We have a whole set of apps and products around field data collection. But we're not going to go into that right now. What we've done is just added this layer into a brand new map that we are sort of looking at for the first time, right? This is not something I've cooked before or pre-made before this live stream. We can see sort of the information about our layer that we've selected here, right? This is our FSC forests again. And just to kind of focus us in a little bit, I want to look at Canada. And I can certainly just zoom the map and look at Canada, but I'm still like, when I apply filters or symbols or anything like that, I'm still talking about the entire layer. So the first thing I actually wanted to do is filter my layer. Actually, the first thing I want to do is change my base map because it's really hard to see. I'm going to go back to that dark gray canvas again. So the first thing that we'll do here is apply a filter. I'm going to add an expression. Basically, this is an expression builder, but under the hood, it's just a SQL filter. So I'm going to choose the attribute. Here we go back to all of the attributes that are available to us. And I see that country code is one of the attributes that's available. So I'm going to use country code. And I looked at the data already, and I know that the country code of Canada, the two-letter country code of Canada is CA. So I'm going to hit save. And now our data is actually filtered down and only going to render and return and symbolize and do all the things on features that meet our filter criteria, which means that we're no longer seeing the data that's over here in Eastern Europe. So if we go back to Canada here, I'm going to go ahead and update the styles a little bit because I think I wanted to understand a little bit more about this data by just looking at it as opposed to needing to click on it and get some information from it. So I'm going to add a field that we're going to use to symbolize this layer. And I looked at this data already. So there's a measurement of how large these forests are essentially as an attribute called area FSC HA for hectares. So the size of the forest essentially. And by default, Arcgis Online has this concept of smart mapping. There's this whole thing called smart mapping, and it applied some smart colors and symbols for us and chose a smart scale for us based on our data. It's actually very intelligent about like understanding the data and being able to apply renderers that sort of pull out the information and the fields that you've chosen as attributes here. So I just chose the one. I think counts and amounts is actually going to be more interesting to me because what this is doing now is putting a point in the middle of every forest and then scaling that point based on the size of the value of this attribute, which represents the size of the forest. And so just with this, I can start to see that the largest forest in this data set is over here near Edmonton. If I click on it, I can see how big it is, and I can see all of the information about it. But I can see that the concentration of the forests, so the most forests, are actually over here on the eastern side of Canada. I can add more fields and be a little bit smarter about my visualization as well. The idea here is that we want as much information to be readily available to the user without having to click or interact with anything, just visually available by looking at the map, right? And so I think the secondary, oh man, I can't remember if it's zone or type. I'm going to try type, I think. Secondary attribute that I wanted to visualize is forest type. It was zone. So let me pick zone. And now, again, the smart mapping module in Arcgis Online is taking over and saying, hey, I think I know how you should render this information, or this data. And so now it's still using the graduated symbols, the different scales of circles for the hectares, for how large the forest is, but it's also using color now. And the color indicates whether it's a boreal or temperate forest. And you can see a few blue down here as we get lower in latitudes. And then the higher latitudes are all boreal forests. So I'm done with that. I'm okay with this. I probably could go a lot farther than I did here. This is a developer building a cartographic map, which is never a great idea, but I guess bear with me on that one. So I wanted to zoom in here really quickly to kind of illustrate another pretty cool thing. We're still seeing the actual polygon features, the area features underneath the graduated symbols, right? So we're not losing the context of where the actual forest is on the earth. So if I click this forest, for example, I'm using the term forest. I think they're actually just like certified areas of forests based on FSC certification standards, but I'm just going to call them forests for short. When I click on that one, the point is in the middle, but I can still click and see the exact sort of area that forest covers, which is very important because we don't want to lose that context. So I'm going to zoom back out so we can see our whole data set here. In fact, I can just click zoom to layer. And that's obviously aware of our filter. It's not zooming back to the entire world where the layer used to be. It's zooming to our filtered version of that layer. I'm gonna go ahead and save this web map. So now we're again kind of going through that pyramid, right? We've built our layer, or we found our layer actually, we didn't build it. And then we put it into a map and applied some attributes to it. We decided how we want the layer to be symbolized. We filtered the layer down. If we wanted to, I'm not going to go through it, we could go in here and configure pop-ups for the layer so that this pop-up was formatted more nicely and had some, we could decide exactly which attributes to show. We could show it as more of a, prose style paragraph with, rich HTML, images, attachments, links, those kinds of things. I'm not going to do that now though. Instead, I'm going to go back to my content and pull up one that I've already done that with so that we have time to write some code. Okay, so we'll go ahead and open this up in the map viewer just so we can see it, but I'm going to leave this on this page as well. In addition to that web map that we've created, if we didn't want to write code and we just wanted to get something up quickly or configure an application, maybe we're not a developer, maybe we are a developer, but we don't want to reinvent the wheel, we could use something like Experience Builder or Web App Builder or App Studio, one of those builders, to create the app. And so I just wanted to open an Experience Builder application that they'd already built. I was going to sort of build it interactively here if we had time, but we're getting close to the end. So let's just open it up. And I'm opening it up in edit mode, hopefully here, so that we can see, you can kind of see the idea of building this app interactively with this sort of WYSIWYG drag and drop interface, as opposed to writing code for the entire app. The Wi-Fi gods are not with me today. Let's see, let's let that load in the background there and see if we can jump over to the web map viewer. This is the one we created together today. There we go. So it's loading in very slowly. Sorry about that. But this is this is Experience Builder, which is again one of those app builders that comes with the ArcGIS platform. Again, I'm using all of this on my free account. This is not anything that's being paid for at this point. And you can see that I went in and embedded a map. So I chose the map widget over here and added a map to the canvas in Experience Builder, and it's still catching up with me here. So essentially, though, when I embed a map, all I need to do is go find the map that I want to use. It's coming in here, so let's see if, there we go. So if I go to select map here, I had to do this, when I created this map, add data, I'm going to get access to all of the maps that I have access to via Arcgis Online in the sharing model and who's shared their content with me. In this case, I'm just looking at my own content, but I could look at ArcGIS Online and discover lots of different web maps that are out there. And I could build my own app using these web maps as the data and that's coming into the application, right? So all I did was choose the FSD forests web map that we created. And then I added a list widget over here on the left, which is, just by adding the list widget that you can see over here on the left sidebar, and then configured the list widget to point to my map as the data source. And then, you can come in here and configure which attributes you want to display for each of these fields. You can make your own fields. You can build your own widgets from scratch if you want. But you can get really close to, or you can get a really polished looking application with Experience Builder without writing any code, which is a pretty powerful thing. Sometimes as developers, we might cringe a little bit about like no code solutions, but this is great because it means that I don't have to, reinvent the wheel and write this application that's pretty basic. In this case, I can spend my time as a developer going and solving the harder problems and writing the more sort of the apps that need a more unique user experience. But you can see here, we can even get, this is pretty ugly, I apologize, but with a little bit more polish and style and maybe a designer helping me out, I could have configured, hover styles and selection styles and all that kind of stuff. And then we can link together functionally the different components of Experience Builder as well. So as I click on the certifications here on the left, or the certified areas here on the left, it's actually panning and zooming and selecting that feature on the map for us, all the while still using our symbols and base maps and all the stuff that we had configured before. And interesting to note here too, this isn't really a feature of ArcGIS necessarily, but one of the attributes of each of these records is a hyperlink to the certificate itself. And so by just rendering that hyperlink, or rendering that URL as a hyperlink, my app now has the superpower of being able to display these things on a map, these forests and certifications on a map, and automatically link out to a third-party system. So having hyperlinks or other types of references to other data sets or images or things like that in your data gives your apps superpowers, and you basically don't have to do anything extra to make that work. All right. So we've got 3 minutes left. I'm going to go to my code sandbox and just show you an app as opposed to building it from scratch. So this is the third section here, bringing ArcGIS into your app. You don't get to see my funny GIF in PowerPoint, but that's okay. All right, so let's open this sandbox that I created before. If you've never used Code Sandbox, it's a little bit like CodePen or JSBin or JS Fiddle or one of these other in-browser code editors. Code Sandbox is probably my favorite though. It's, as you can maybe see already, it's a bit more like a full IDE in the browser. In fact, it uses the same libraries and engine that VS Code, the desktop IDE, uses. So you can have mini files, you can have build processes, you can have linters and style, like prettier, for example, in this case, going on. You can do a lot of really cool things. So all I did was stand up a basic React application in Code Sandbox with nothing special, no boilerplates or anything like that. All it has is 3 files. The first thing I did was add 3 dependencies in this case. And I really only needed 2, but I wanted it to look nice, so I added 3. One is Esri Loader. This is an open source project by Esri that allows you to inject the Esri's JavaScript API into your application. It's very good for loading the JS API into something like React or Angular. I maybe will leave a link to the JavaScript API documentation. If you're building web apps, use the JavaScript API. It's got so many features and is just like bolted onto the ArcGIS platform in a really nice way. I'm using this other library that a coworker of mine built called Esri Loader hooks, so that I can use React hooks, if you're familiar with what that is, to very quickly integrate the JavaScript API into my React application. And then I'm using Calcite React, which is one of Esri's sort of UI frameworks that's just being used here for the Hello Hackers H1, as you can see. But it's really simple. Let me zoom in a bit because I know it's probably pretty small. If we look at the code first over here, this is just, again, just a React component called app. I've just applied some styles here to make it look a little bit nicer, but really all that's going on with regard to the ArcGIS platform is this hook, in this case, a React hook, that's referencing our web map by ID. Again, that idea that every item in ArcGIS Online or the ArcGIS ecosystem has a GUID, a globally unique ID, means that in your application, that's how you refer to it. Notice that I don't have to write any code or parse together any JSON or anything like that to describe things like which base map to show or which symbols to use, right? These graduated symbols that we have color-coded because we created that in the web map that we worked on earlier, or how to display the pop-ups. This is pointing to that other web map that I had created sort of before the live stream. And you can see that this pop-up is showing the same data, but we've crafted it in a way that it's a bit more, paragraphs giving you exactly the information that you need as opposed to just a list of attributes, including the link here that I can click on to go back over to the FSC website and view the certificate itself. And all of that's possible by just referencing that web map ID. And then within my application, again, this is a bit specific to React, but I'm just embedding that map into this div on the page. And that's literally all I have to do. This view that we get back from the use web map hook is a handle to the JavaScript API map object. And I console logged that here so that we could look at it. This is getting even more crowded now. Whoops, let me pull the console up. If we look at the console log here, this is a JavaScript object coming from the JavaScript API, Esri's ArcGIS JavaScript API, that has events and methods and properties that you need to interact with the map. So you can do anything from watch the map for an extent change, which means like anytime I click and pan the map, I can fire an event. Then that event is decorated with which features are on the map and what the extent of the map is geographically and all of the other information I might need, right? I can listen for an event on when I click on a feature, which feature I clicked on. Maybe I want to click a feature on the map and then do something in the other part of my application. All that's possible by having a handle onto this view right here. So if you're getting started, or if you're building a web application and you're using React, or even if you're not using React, use Esri Loader. You can basically get the JavaScript API, the web map, the layers, and access to the REST API, that pyramid that we talked about, all shoved into your application in like 1 or 2 lines of code. And then just use the JS API docs, which you can go to js.arcgis.com, or you can navigate from the developer's website that we started at. Go to the API reference and figure out how to use that view object and all of the other primitives and classes that the JavaScript API provides to you. I'll just pull up that one just as to tie the knot here. This is the map view I was talking about that we had access to, and we can see how to construct it. We can see the properties, methods, events, all kinds of things, and the objects that you get back and the parameters that you give in and everything like that. The samples are also really, really useful. The JS API team has done an amazing job of putting sample code out there that's extremely relevant and basically teaches you how to use the API in any way that you may need to use it. So with that, I think we're out of time. Let's see here. There you go. There's my gift, because we waited until the very end to actually write some code, which makes me sad. But so if you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat here, ask them in the Slack workspace that's been set up, the DocuSign 2020.slack.com workspace, or you can find me on Twitch or Twitter, or I'm in the Slack. My name is Josh Peterson in the Slack workspace, and we can chat from there. All right. Thanks, everyone.